Well, folks, thanks for tuning in again this morning, again today, whatever time of day you're listening to this. Stay tuned. We've got some amazing things here, everything from increased bombings to something's interesting happening in the lawsuits around Prince Harry and also stuff at Buckingham Palace. And we're going to take a look at some pretty amazing trends that are taking place among Gen Z. Well, first of all, let's jump to a story that we've been following, and I want to just update you on this before we get to the Iran and the NATO discussions, and that is Graham Plattner. You remember this was the guy who was running for the Senate, and he had won the Democrat nomination for the Senate race that's going to be coming up in November. And probably nobody has, certainly in recent, maybe at any time in history, had such a long list of accusations against him, sexual improprieties and Nazi affiliation, all kinds of stuff that he'd been doing on the internet. I mean, this Graham Plattner, but all of the Democrat Party continuing to support him and getting the Democrat Party themselves getting all kinds of attacks, verbally, of course, and otherwise from what looked like hypocrisy on their part for supporting a guy who had such a horrendous record. Well, the latest accusations that have come out against him, and these are accusations not proven in court, but he just said they are too, it's all too much now. And as we predicted right here, he has dropped out of the race. You heard us here talk about this. I said, watch for this. Even the Democrats who were trying to ignore all this stuff, the latest accusations. So Plattner is out. That's an interesting thing to be watching in the state of Maine. Even though that's a U.S. side, it's been an interesting development and huge political discussions about the fact that he was in the race and supported by major Democrats for such a long period of time. So let's jump right back to the in Turkey. As you know, as we've been talking about, NATO was having its annual meeting. They say it's probably going to go to every 2 years now. Everybody wondering what was going to happen. President Trump, was he going to blow it all up? That's verbally. Please take that carefully. That's verbally. In fact, what's happened at the end of the meeting, the Prime Minister CARNEY, which was surprising to some people, came out saying that Trump had done the right thing over the last couple of years in terms of forcing NATO countries. There's 32 NATO countries. Remember, this was formed in 1949, and this organization after the Second World War, and it was formed to be a pushback against the Soviet Union, letting the Soviet Union know that if any European countries or any of the countries, including Canada and the US, that were part of this North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's what NATO stands for, that an attack on any one country would be seen as an attack on all of the countries, and all 32 countries would respond. It's been seen as a fairly successful organization over the years, seen as one of the reasons that the Soviet Union, while it was still in place, in fact, did not attack any of the small European countries that were part of it, because they knew if they attacked one, they attacked everybody, and that also that would bring in Canada and the US. And of course, President Trump has been saying for a number of years that the NATO countries were not, they're supposed to, by virtue of the agreement when NATO was signed, 2% of their economy, 2% of the value was supposed to go to defense spending in their own countries. Many countries over the years not sticking up with that. The U.S. increasingly picking up the freight or picking up the load and the cost. And under President Trump, he was saying no more. And if you remember, even a couple of years ago, he was saying he would pull the U.S. out of NATO unless other countries started pulling their weight. Other countries have. They've all come up to the 2% mark, and some are even now headed for the new guideline of 5%. And Prime Minister Carney said it was the right thing for Trump to do to bring this pressure. So that was the positive side of it. It ended on kind of a, if you can call it a friendly note, even Trump talking about the private meeting with all the leaders and saying there was a lot of love in the room. So there you go. And right while that was going on, I mean, in the midst of that, the U.S. has torn up the memorandum of understanding, the so-called ceasefire with Iran. Heavy bombing going on the last 2 days, as Iran has, as many of us predicted, violated the memorandum of understanding. Iran continued to fire on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran continuing to say they were not going to pull back Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's the terrorist group that Iran has been funding for decades with hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the U.S. has had enough, and very significant bombing again on Iran. So we will watch and see. That has upset and got the markets a little bit concerned. No major drops as we look across Canada, US, Europe, and Asia. No huge drops in the market, but a little bit of uncertainty. Oil inched up to about $73 a barrel. So remember, it was getting down into the 60s. So anytime that there's a concern and people wondering what increased military activity is going to cause, that's entirely predictable. We'll see what happens there. In the US, one of the companies, remember, we talked about this last week, that President Trump was telling all oil and gas companies they better not be raising their gas prices, especially as we get into the holiday season in the US. Most companies seem to respond to that, and the company Freedom, called Freedom Fuel, has lowered their prices about 50% below the national average in the US. So people are taking a bit of a calm view there. Prices not spiking up. Ukraine, while the U.S. was increasing the attacks on Iran last night and the night before, Ukraine has upped significantly their attacks, using missile attacks on Russia, with significant strikes and hits all across Russia, and mainly aiming at the various Russian facilities, petrochemical facilities. And it's very clear that they've been using the U.S. Patriot missile system also within their, let's say, their handbag full of tactical capabilities in the U.S., saying, yes, they have been increasing their support for Ukraine, helping them to do this. So interesting to see this, the increased activity on the part of Ukraine and pushing back Russia. We'll see what comes of that. The saga in Great Britain and the UK, for all of you royal watchers, that continues. As you know, and as we've talked about, we were reporting it early on here, with Prince Harry planning his visit for a couple days in July. Now, remember, he's initially going over there. He heads up a group called the Invictus Games, and this is an international organization for wounded warriors, as they might say, veterans who've been wounded in action and are getting back to life and participating in these games. Of a very positive organization. And the big question, is he going to be seeing his father, the king? Is he going to be able to visit his brother? So the whole thing that's worked out is from the palace, and actually from the government of England, they have said no, there will be no protective services for Harry's family if he comes. Now, the palace had said they would give one of their residences. Indeed, Harry could come if you want, but there would be no protection outside of the palace or outside of any of the royal residences. And this was a determination made actually by the government of UK. So it's not King Charles himself. And as we talked about, we kind of predicted this would happen. We talked about it even yesterday with Prince Harry, or I guess we got to be careful. Maybe he's not a prince anymore. I got to be careful of the terminology. But with himself and Meghan Markle a few years ago, saying they were stepping back from, they weren't going to be taking on royal duties. They did what was seen as their three big attacks. One in their interview with Oprah, and then again a Netflix documentary, and also in Prince Harry's book called Spare, doing pretty severe attacks on the family, so-called family secrets, really causing a lot of offense and problem. Anyway, would the king have seen him? He probably would have. Would his brother William have seen him? Probably not. William is seen as, of course, the next person to ascend to the throne, as the protector of the institution. And so no protection there. Family not coming. Prince Harry will be there for the Invictus Games meetings that are coming up. And kind of interesting, bad news for another bad news hit for Prince Harry. As we've reported on the past, he's been involved over the last year, actually over a year, in a huge lawsuit against it's called the Association of Newspapers in the UK, and talking about all kinds of journalistic standards that were violated. He was suing them. He said they got information that they shouldn't have received, and all this type of thing. And actually, Elton John and the actress Elizabeth Hurley had also been joining him in that lawsuit because they said stuff that was reported about them also was information was gained illegally by the newspaper association. Anyway, July 7th, the ruling came out, and Harry and Elton and Elizabeth, they lost the lawsuit. The judges, the courts have said that the press, the media did not do anything illegal. Look, media can be oppressive and omnipresent, and in the lives of people in public office, they can be brutal, and we all know that. I have found that out personally. But in fact, of breaking the law, the courts have ruled they did not. So there's going to be huge costs there associated on Harry. These are very expensive proceedings, huge costs. We'll see what unfolds from that, but not really a good week for Harry. Well, kind of interesting to see at the end of the NATO meeting. You remember we reported on this in the news. There's been lots of reporting over the last couple of years that the White House had ordered the new Air Force One, an incredible flying fortress, billions of dollars from Boeing, and it was delivered. And they've flown it a little bit, even taken it to the Middle East. But after the NATO hearings, President Trump did not fly back in the brand new Air Force One. He took the older one back. And interesting in his making his comments, almost sound people were speculating was he said it was for security reasons that would be overly targeted coming out of Turkey and the airspace there, and they wouldn't have full control of it. So interesting comments. But he also made comments about some people are saying, was he predicting his own death one day? That because he said there's so many countries, Iran and others, and so many forces around the world that want to see him dead, that can he continue to stay alive? And he actually talked about the fact that a lot of people don't realize this. If you're a president of the United States, in that particular job classification, you have a 5% chance of being killed on the job. Now, people say, well, 5%, that's not that high. It's actually very high. Think about it. That's 1 in 20 presidents of the United States have been killed, 1 in 20. So would you take a job? Let's say someone offered you a job to, I don't know, to be the manager of a coffee shop, and you were told that 1 out of every 20 coffee shop managers get shot. Would you take that job? Probably not. And anyway, and that's a job with a much higher danger rate. People often say, being a firefighter or a police officer are the most dangerous jobs. In fact, they're not. There are a number of occupations. Working in the oil fields, for instance, has a higher death rate and activity. There's a number of activities with much higher death rates than being a firefighter or a police officer. And in fact, we will see what happens. But these predictions, or so-called predictions, is that going to unfold? We don't know. Anyway, there is some sobering reflections by President Trump on his job and the dangers of it. Well, the whole issue of data centers or data centers, whatever you want to call them, for AI, these are, remember, with AI, where we do need to be moving ahead with the um, amazing breakthroughs in all kinds of benefits for human life that artificial intelligence can be bringing, just in terms of the speed which on health issues alone and diseases and fighting disease can be garnered, and technology. Anyway, as we know, it takes a lot of space, a lot of land, takes a lot of water, and the groups from the left, especially socialist groups, are giving courses to citizens on how to oppose these, and there are some viable concerns that need to be addressed, or water issues, and the companies building these should be the ones to assume the cost of that, not on the local citizens. The flip side is they bring thousands and thousands of jobs, bring huge economic activity, and whether it's Canada or the US, help to advance the technology so that countries like China don't surge ahead. What they are finding, and there's stories out today that some of these companies are dealing with First Nations group, because on First Nations, it's a little different situation when it's on their land. One thing I've learned in helping companies in terms of developing projects with First Nations group is that the regulatory process and the approval process is much more common sense when you're dealing with First Nations. They quite rightly look after and are concerned about issues related to the environment on their land, and other such issues like water usage and all of that. They are very good at that, has been my experience. but they also are able to get through all of the loopholes because it's their own land in a lot more meaningful fashion, and with a lot less time wasted. You can get a project approved on a First Nations land, maybe in less than a year, depending on what the project is. And municipalities, which create unbelievable hoops to jump through, can take years to get a project approved. And elected officials, especially at I've said this before, the municipal level, you need to be looking at streamlining these things, not forsaking safety, but certainly forsaking unnecessary bureaucracy. And we'll watch for continued development as you see the data AI centers perhaps developing more on First Nations lands. I don't know. We'll watch how that goes. Well, a report out just yesterday, huge polling firm has said that the support for capitalism or free enterprise, the free enterprise system, continues to drop. And this is an area of real concern. Now, let's showcase that. Let's bookend this discussion, because to really get a handle on the debate on capitalism versus socialism, you got to go way back. Adam Smith, of course, I'm sure you've heard of him, but he is the person who wrote his book called An Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations. So it's simply called The Wealth of Nations. He wrote that it was published in 1776. Interestingly, the year of independence had nothing to do with that, but he wrote that book. And his book, he talks about nations which follow a good system of laws and a good system of protections. You can allow the natural self-interest of human beings to be a positive force when it comes to commercial activities, when it comes to small business or large business, basically looking at it from the point of view that, yes, we are all self-interested as human beings. We all care for ourselves. And if that is properly tempered with the right laws, and as he even takes a biblical reflection and talks about if people are understanding the authority of God and properly respecting their fellow human beings, like things like love thy neighbor. Adam Smith does reference God. He talks about an invisible hand that, if you can remember that little phrase, the invisible hand talked about by Adam Smith, talks about the fact that when you've got a proper structure and when you have people that recognize that actually God is the ultimate authority, then the invisible hand will work through the markets to produce positive results in terms of business relationships. And that if you want your business to succeed, for instance, let's go back to that coffee shop, you want your business to succeed, then you want to keep your customers happy. You want to, as far as possible, keep prices down. Governments must allow competition so that one person, if there's only one coffee shop in town, you know that prices would continue to go up. They wouldn't be that sensitive. You have two coffee houses in town, they keep each other in check. It improves the service, it improves the product, and then you put laws in place for the people who won't do that or who try and gouge people. So that's the one system, basically called a capital system, where you take your capital. All capital is the amount of capability that you have. Let's say you've got some savings, or let's say you've got some land you can use, or perhaps you've got a building that you can turn into a coffee house. So your capital, you employ that capital to produce a product or a service, which always will lead to better productivity and better service as long as there's competition allowed. That's the basic premise relative to capitalism. Marxism, of course, it is the bookend at the other end of the shelf, and Karl Marx, 72 years later, writing the Communist Manifesto. And the main and significant difference there, of course, and it's very interesting to see, he comes out hard against any concept of God. That later results, of course, any communist society which follows Karl Marx's views will in fact make it God illegal, in fact killing and arresting people who even pursue Christianity. So those are the two sort of bookends of the argument. There's a lot of phases in between that. And so it's kind of alarming, but not totally shocking to see the support for capitalism going down, because Karl Marx and his writings became well distributed through universities at the turn of the 18th century into the 1900s, and of course well now into the century that we're in. And when you add democracy to Marxism, it kind of makes it look almost a little more civilized, but the same principles apply. Marxism or socialistic policies are opposed to God. They don't like the notion of God. They don't like the notion of family. They say family has to be reconstructed. They don't like the notion of private property so you can raise families. So those are the two bookends. So when you see, because of the exposure and the total in-depth Marxist culturalism that has been alive and well in the university system for well over 100 years, then people are affected by that, and more students come through that. And of course, then more people will find fault with a capitalist system. And the more you have a socialist system, the stronger a socialist system emerge. A number of us make the case that will make for a negative economy, that will make for more poverty, it will make for less prosperity. And you see, I've used the examples before. You take North Korea, South Korea, one ethnic group of people, same history, same DNA. And then in the 1950s, a dividing line goes across that country. North Korea is communist, South Korea becomes very capitalist, and of course, prosperity in South Korea and increase in health and increase in education, far surpassing anything in North Korea, which chose the communist route. We say this, saw the same situations. You can look at East Germany in the middle of the last century, East Germany and West Germany, East Germany following the Soviet Union, becoming very communistic, West Germany not doing that. So you've got the same people and they're living side by side, the same history, the same DNA. West Germany, of course, flourishing in a capital system, longevity rates much longer, health rates much better, prosperity rates much better. And these comparisons go on, even into various countries where different states or provinces can adapt policies, economic policies that are either more capitalist or more socialist. And we see it consistently in provinces in Canada. You see it in the US. The poverty levels eventually get higher in the socialistically driven states. The health measurements become worse. And so that's why this is concerning when you see support for capitalism dropping, but we see it certainly in the US with their elections there, where people who aren't even soft socialists but hard socialists getting elected. Will that have an effect? Will it really take hold in the US? And will it continue to grow in Canada? These are things that are being, of course, closely watched, and we will see how all of this rolls out. The interesting announcement yesterday, very positive, I see it as positive, investigation going on for 2 years with combining the FBI, the U.S. Law Agency, and the RCMP in Canada. They've been involved in over 2 years of investigation of, and they've called it Operation Hardball. They're actually looking at three different gangs, but primarily the gang, and we talked about this. If you regular listeners and viewers will know, we talked about Lawrence Bishnoi and the Bishnoi gang. Lawrence Bishnoi from India. He's actually in jail in India and apparently still runs his operation from there. But one of the organizations being organized, and we have talked about that organization in Canada, the Bishnoi operation, among the Sikh and Indian community, and how devastating that has been. And many arrests made, not just in the US, but in Canada and even in the EU. Depending on which report you're looking at, anywhere from 37 to 42 arrests have been made. And but one of the main bad guys is still on the loose. He escaped. Satinderjeet Singh. He's a partner of Lawrence Bishnoi. They actually call him Goldie Brar, still on the loose. And the organization certainly in Canada and also in the U.S., just devastating in terms of their extortion amongst the Sikh community in Canada, murders and shootings and fire bombings. Back in 2023, the person who was head of a separatist, this in Canadian separatism, but it's a separatist movement that comes out of India, transported into Canada, and that particular leader, Hardeep Singh, was shot down in cold blood in 2023 outside a Sikh temple in Surrey. So this operation really being clamped down, and we give full credit to the FBI and the RCMP working together on this. And in fact, their drug operation Bishnoi gang drug operation huge, and they're have been using for years commercial semi trucks coming out of the States, crossing the border into Canada, back and forth with thousands of pounds at any given time of cocaine and other drugs. So big breakthrough there. Good for them. Let's watch that roll out. Um, been commentary, some international commentary on Prime Minister Carney with very positive remarks towards President Trump in terms of giving Trump full credit for pressuring European and North American countries who are involved in NATO to up their spending. So, some people raise the eyebrows that Prime Minister Carney would be praising Trump for that, but in fact he did. And yet, at the same time, an interesting story and good journalism here on the part of Darren Major, senior journalist over the CBC. And he's talking about the fact that there's been a recent shutdown of an organization called CORE, that's within Canada. This is an investigation agency that was set up by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It stands for the Canadian Ombudsman for uh, Responsible entrepreneurism, I believe, or responsible enterprise. I'm sorry, the Canadian Ombudsman for Responsible Enterprise, and supposedly former Prime Minister Trudeau set that up to investigate Canadian business and businesses that are doing business not just in Canada but around the world. And it was set up to investigate that. And without a whole lot of fanfare, Prime Minister Carney has shut down that organization. And as they were still looking at complaints being brought forward by individuals about bad business practices by Canadian companies abroad. Even the United Nations have made comments on the fact that it was just so quickly shut down. And very interesting in terms of not just how quickly it happened, but in question period in Canada in the House of Commons, just hours before the announcement was made that it was being shut down, the Minister of International Trade, and his name is Maninder Sidhu, he was asked about that organization and what's going to be happening, and he said, well, no decisions are being made. They're just kind of looking at things, and then hours later it was announced, no, the entire organization has been shut down. I've been Minister of International Trade, so I know somewhat about the position that Minister Maninder Sidhu was in, and I can tell you I would have been very upset as Minister of International Trade if I had said one thing and just hours later the Prime Minister had announced something else. That's not the way Prime Minister Harper ever operated. We always operated collegially and with good discussion and planning. So it's definitely raised some eyebrows. This may not go away. This story may not go away. Keep an eye on that. Something else, an interesting, kind of a fun element that came out of the out of the NATO meetings just ended in Turkey. The Turkish President Erdogan had gifted each head of state, each president and prime minister of the 32 nations, given them a gift of a very, let's say, a rare and very expensive firearm, a gun in a beautiful case, and even with live ammunition. The model of the gun for gun enthusiasts out there, it's a Gumise Turkish model gun. It's basically a 357 Magnum. Pretty impressive gun. It was presented with engravings on it and a nice wooden box and live ammunition. And of course, Prime Minister Carney instantly panicked because he's got a lot of gun laws about even people owning innocent firearms and people who are sport shooters. And so he announced quite quickly he would not be accepting this gift. It would be sent back to Canada, but they'll have the RCMP, some kind of a National Guard RCMP, is escorting the gun back to Canada. Interesting that prime ministers and presidents still will accept, when they visit various countries, they'll accept a ceremonial sword. And as we've seen in Canada, certainly, very unfortunately, death by stabbing and death by knives has gone up. But I guess it's okay to accept a sword, but not a gun. Anyway, hopefully it'll be either find itself into a Canadian museum or maybe get sold to a gun enthusiast, and that money can be plowed back for some good purpose for the taxpayers. Well, there's a kind of a tragic lawsuit that's working its way through the system in Ontario. A couple there that were childless, and they hired, for lack of a better word, a woman to be a surrogate. And of course, in those cases, the woman gets impregnated and signs a contract with the couple that she will bear the child, care for it during pregnancy, and then bear the child, and then the couple gets the child. Well, the very unfortunate lawsuit, what has happened here in the process of the child's development embryonically, the doctors reported at some point about mid-pregnancy. This is just going according to the court, and I'm not mentioning any of the names of the people involved here. Very sensitive case. But it was determined that the child could have some deformities, so the couple told the woman, to abort the child. The woman did not. As it turned out, a month or so later, as they continued to monitor growth of the child, the unborn child, that in fact the deficiency was possibly a cleft palate, something that is regularly fixed fairly easily these days. We all know, and many of us know and have friends who have adjusted cleft palates. And so the woman who was pregnant, the surrogate mother, was saying, no, she's not going to abort it. She did not abort the child. She had the child. The the couple that wanted the child aborted is suing her. It's become very messy, a very heartbreaking case. But it brings to light that Canada allows this to happen. You can use a surrogate to bring a child into the world. Apparently, you're not allowed to pay for that, but you can pay for the expenses. So, of course, what happens, people being capitalistic and good entrepreneurs, the expenses can be, let's say, quite generous. And so, anyway, this back and forth lawsuit taking place. I'll make a long-term prediction that it'll probably take 20 years to see. But I think that's not the last. We'll hear about this child who apparently is healthy, alive, and well, about 2 years old, and we'll see how that case develops. This type of surrogacy is banned in many other countries. Like in India, you can't do this. In Thailand, you can't do this. Interesting that Canada does allow it. Well, I don't know if you've been hearing or following among the Gen Z crowd. They're calling it the Great Meme Reset, the meme reset. And there's a real, almost a nostalgic push among the older Gen Zs and now the youngers to get back to the time of, wait for it, not 100 years ago, 10 years ago, 2016, when a lot of what's developing in AI and on the internet was let's say, earlier stages. And a lot of Gen Z seeing that as a simpler time, a more positive time, when humor wasn't quite as cutting, and when things were generally more predictive. And so we're seeing it, for instance, the reverting back to Snapchat filters, if you're familiar with those, even some of the fashion trends. So unlike our generation, or I'll just say mine, which would see nostalgia as something maybe 50 years ago, Gen Zs have a shorter view, and they're yearning for the happier, simpler pre-COVID times and more optimistic times of 2016. And with that has come a change in a name that's been used in a negative way. So if you were called a Karen, this is a female who is sort of entitled and always harping and complaining and whining about things. That's a Karen, and I feel badly for any woman who has that name. Karen is a great name. I know a lot of people, wonderful people by the name Karen, and I don't attribute that at all to the characteristics that this name carries among the Gen Z world. But that's been sort of moved away, and now it's a Jessica. If you are a Jessica, it's a little more positive. It's somebody, you're a little more basic, a little more predictable, and you're seen as someone who's really trying hard to be accepted. So that makes you a Jessica. To all the Karens and Jessicas out there, you have beautiful names. Don't pull back. Interesting, though, to see these different terminologies emerge. It has been confirmed now that the pastor who was imprisoned in China for a period of time, Pastor Edra Jean, in fact, has made it back to the U.S. President Trump is being given credit for this in one of his recent meetings with President Xi over there in China, and he spoke about this issue. So people are very happy. Still a lot of persecution, religious persecution going on in China, but good to see Pastor Jean has been released, a positive thing. And for the next couple of days, actually from July 9th to July 11th in Canada, keep an eye on the news on Parliament Hill. There are many Christians gathering, calling for 2 days of prayer for Canada and the future. You know what, folks, prayer works. It can't hurt. And all the best to our friends out there on Parliament Hill with 2 days of prayer. All the best. Prayerfully, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.